Well, hello everyone, and thanks for listening to the Quality Hub, Chatting with ISO Experts. I'm your host, Xavier Francis, and today I'm here with Norm Verbeck, consultant at Core. Glad you could join us again.
Happy to be here, X.
So we've had you on the podcast before, but this one's kind of a big one because we're talking about 14,001 2026 update and see where we're at with all that. But let's get started with a question to know you a little bit better. Where was your most unforgettable vacation?
So 2 years ago, we actually did a cruise to the Mediterranean.
Ooh.
And that was my first time ever being overseas. So that would probably be the most unforgettable just because of the entire history. It's just so...
Did you get to see like Greece?
Established, yes. So
Parthenon and all that?
Absolutely. And we got to see so many different areas. It was like a 10-day cruise, which you kind of got to sample a bunch of places.
Oh, wow.
So that was pretty unforgettable.
That's awesome. Yeah. I've not been overseas. I've been in every state but Alaska. I've had many great vacations. I love to go to Universal Florida. That's like my happy place. But one year, I think it was 2015, 2016, my in-laws took the entire family. So my wife and her brother and all the families on an adventure Disney vacation, but it was out to Wyoming and Yellowstone. We went to Jackson Hole. Then we went and did a bus all the way through. We stayed like 200 yards from Old Faithful. Then we got to go to a dude ranch. It was like 7,000 feet up. And it was the first time I realized why they said the Milky Way.
Yes.
You know, you get out there with no lights and you're that far up and it's just like, oh my gosh. So that was probably my most unforgettable. Well, instead of talking fun stuff, let's talk about ISO 14001 2026. Not that it it doesn't compare to vacations, but It's important to us. So let's get into the update. So I'm going to take a couple approaches here in asking these questions today. And the first one is for organizations that are already certified to 14,001 2015. What do you see as the most important changes in the standard for 14,001 2026 and the ones they need to probably pay attention to first?
So initially, the biggest things to focus on are environmental context, planning, and getting leadership involved.
Okay.
So the structure of 14,001 really hasn't changed much, but the standard now expects organizations to be more explicit about today's environmental realities. Some of the items would be like climate change, resource constraints, pollution, biodiversity.
Okay.
So it expands a little bit.
And gets a little more detailed.
Absolutely.
Not just what you got to do for your, what was it? Risks and aspects. Is that what it is in 14,001 or at least in the 2015 one?
Yep. It ties into that a little bit for the context portion, but yeah, it's just more of an environmental focus.
Gotcha.
And they expand upon it. So for service-based companies like a consulting firm or IT provider, that could be thinking more clearly about energy usage.
Okay.
Business travel, reliance on data centers and cloud services.
Yeah, data centers, they're a big topic right now because they take so much in resources and electricity and all of that.
Absolutely. And then for like a manufacturing-based company, it might mean revisiting how climate risks affect either raw materials, water availability, or even supplier reliability.
Yeah, if you're getting stuff overseas, that can make a big difference with how much it costs and pollution and environmental aspects from that.
Yes. And if you're already certified, you're probably most of the way there. The difference now is showing clearer awareness and decision-making around those issues.
Okay. Well, that makes a little bit more sense now and gets a little more detail of some of the changes. Now, if you've already met those 14,001 2015 requirements, where will you most likely need to update your documentation, aspects review, and process planning under the new version?
Yep. So one of the important things to remember is it's not going to really be about creating new documents, but it's going to be more about adjusting your existing ones.
Okay.
So organizations would normally need to refresh their context analysis, which that's what we were talking about briefly. They would want to revisit their environmental aspect evaluations. So you have to show evidence that you've determined which environmental aspects are significant to you. So you want to reevaluate those. You'll basically want to clean up how risks, opportunities, and changes are documented. Okay.
Now, you were talking about, maybe we'll get into a little bit more of this in a little bit, but when you're looking at, based on that new purview of the climate control and stuff, are you again still just looking at how it affects you, or are you looking at how it affects overall?
At both. You need to look upstream, actually, and even downstream, especially for manufacturing when you're, if you're, depending on what you're producing, end of life use of those products.
Okay. So they are looking more at, it's a little broader than just your own business now.
Absolutely.
Okay. And what you might need to meet requirement wise, like before, whether it's local, federal, state, whatever guidelines and regulations you had. Now you're looking a little more beyond that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And just to kind of like for kind of both scenarios again. So for service-based businesses, that might mean updating document information to better show how remote work, IT systems, or even outsourced services affect environmental performance.
Okay.
And then when we get into more of the production or manufacturing areas, it's often about documenting life cycle thinking, which is what we were talking about, the upstream and downstream from you. But that includes how raw materials come in, what happens during production, what happens to waste emissions or products after they leave your site.
Okay.
But the system itself usually stays the same. The thinking just needs to be clearer on paper not paper anymore, but on your documentation.
On your documents, yeah.
Yes.
However you do those, whether it's paper, digital, or otherwise. I don't know if there's anything else out there, but maybe there are. So how should certified organizations revisit their understanding of environmental context now that a new edition puts more emphasis on external environmental conditions and emerging environmental pressures?
So this is where ISO 14001 gets more real world. But instead of a generic paragraph about like market conditions or regulations, organizations are expected to think about actual environmental pressures that could affect them.
Okay.
So a service-based company might ask what happens to operations during extreme weather events, energy shortage, or even transport disruptions.
Okay.
And then manufacturing-based companies might ask whether droughts could affect water availability, whether extreme heat could affect processes or workers, or whether suppliers are exposed to climate-related disruptions as well.
And probably some of that was due to COVID.
Absolutely.
Like, oh, wow, this is a huge disruption. Maybe we should see how that's going to affect things.
Yes. And it's not so much about predicting the future, but it's about showing that the organization understands the environmental landscape that they're operating in today.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Now, you mentioned this earlier as one of the changes. What role will leadership need to play differently under the new 14,001/2026 as environmental management becomes more closely tied to business strategy and direction?
So for this area, it's not going to really be about doing more work necessarily, but it's going to be about being more visible and accountable to the system. So the 2026 version strengthens the connection between environmental management and business direction.
Okay.
Leaders can still delegate tasks, but they can't delegate responsibility.
So the buck stops with them.
Yes. And then for service organizations, that might show up as leadership considering environmental impacts when making growth, travel, or outsourcing decisions. And then for manufacturing, it may show up in capital investment decisions, energy strategies, or how suppliers are selected and managed. Okay. And then auditors are going to be looking for evidence that environmental management influences the decisions that you're making, and it's not just handled in the background.
So they're instead of just like, okay, yeah, that's important or not in the past, how are you handling it? I need some evidence on that.
Absolutely.
Going back to, you said something about remote work. I can certainly see how in larger businesses, especially, let's say your workforce, you give them a 3-day work weekend and they can work 2 days from home. You know, how are you managing your energy at that particular point? That can be a big thing. If the building's mostly empty and you're still heating or cooling it or have lights on or computers on, that can be a big addition to your cost. And it's going to be helping in the environment in the long run.
Yes. And there's some even service-based companies that are even sharing office space, basically. So they, might be in the office like, Mondays and Wednesdays. Another company might be using that same space on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting, I've never thought about that. Yes. I can see how that would be a net gain for everybody.
Sure.
Okay. Under this, will organizations need to rethink how they evaluate environmental aspects and impacts in light of the edition's new updated environmental priorities?
So most organizations won't need an entirely new aspect evaluation.
Okay.
But
Just a tweak.
Yes, but they'll need better inputs.
Okay.
So the updated standard executes aspect evaluations to clearly consider climate impacts, resource use, and biodiversity. So the previous standard didn't explicitly lay out those three things, but they expanded upon that. So that's especially when applying that life cycle perspective. So you need to think upstream from your business and downstream. So basically those aspects, if we kind of get into the different areas, then for service-based companies, that might mean updating their aspect register to better reflect energy usage from offices, lease spaces, or data centers.
Okay.
For manufacturing-based companies, that might mean expanding the aspect reviews to include supplier practices, transportation impacts, which we were talking about a little bit there, or even product end of life considerations.
Okay.
So how do you have to dispose of certain things?
Gotcha.
And then if the aspect register hasn't been revisited in a couple of years, the update's a good trigger to review it.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Especially if you're probably hitting year 3 where you'd have a recertification anyway.
yes.
Makes sense. What does the standard define as biodiversity?
So it's not really explicit in that.
Okay.
But biodiversity is, again, you hear about mammals, fish, whatever, over the years, things become extinct. So, biodiversity, it's like, again, there's things that even come in to our environment in the U.S., for example, where if there's a company that's operating, say, shipping vessels overseas, whenever they're transporting whatever oil containers over to the U.S., there's things that attach to the hull.
Okay.
And those ships actually even have to, recycle water through it. So whenever it's pulling in ocean water and recycling that coming, over across the Atlantic or Pacific or whatever,
it can have an effect where it's going.
It can have an effect where it's going. So and then it's introducing things into our environment that have never been. So then that could basically, you hear about the invasive species.
Yeah, yeah. When I lived in Northern Virginia, and that was a huge thing where, what were those things called? It's a fish that is it's really hard to kill.
Yes.
And it eats everything else.
Yep.
I can't remember the name of it, but that was a major issue. I think it may still be.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember the name, but there's a similar type of scenario up in the Thousand Islands area, up on the St. Lawrence. So there's an invasive fish in that now that we were up fishing over the last, few years. I've been up with my parents a couple of times, and we're first fishing for perch, and occasionally you'll be catching one of these other fish that it's small, but it's tough to definitely get rid of. So.
Yeah. So that's a lot of that could have been due to it being from a vessel or something, bringing that over and getting into a waterway. Well, that makes a lot of sense. It can be super dangerous. So that's good to know. That a little bit more clearly on what biodiversity means in this specific situation, especially if you're not familiar with it and you haven't had to look at it before. Maybe you need to now.
Yep.
So how does the updated harmonized structure help organizations that are already integrated with 14,001, maybe 9,001, 45,001? I know those go together often in an IMS.
So the structure does still stay aligned across the different standards, especially in areas like context, leadership, planning, and change management. If an organization already shares processes such as risk assessment, management review, document control across those different standards, then the transition will mainly involve small adjustments rather than major restructuring.
Right.
So, and again, that's, if you're already integrated, it's going to definitely be less work because it maintains that integration.
Gotcha.
So, but organizations with mature integrated systems often find the transition easier because the framework's already in place.
Right.
So,
right. And another cool thing is 14, we have the update now. 9,001 is later this year. 45,001 is next year. So we may even see more harmonization as those other standards get released in their updates.
Absolutely.
What kind of transition timeline should currently certified organizations expect? How long is this going to take? And how should they align that with their surveillance or recertification cycle? You mentioned a little bit, maybe updating that. If you haven't looked at something for a while, now's a good time.
Yes. So there's typically a 3-year transition period following the publication date. So, and I'm not quite sure the exact date, but it was around the middle of April.
Okay.
So I think it was just last week or so that the standard was actually published.
Okay.
So from that published date that's on the standard, you have 3 years of transition.
Okay.
So normally the most effective approach is to align the activities for transitioning with the audit with either an existing surveillance audit or a recertification audit. So usually most times it's better with the recertification year because, you don't want to get recertified to the old standard 2 years from now.
Yeah. Let's say you're on year 2 and next year is going to be your recertification. You bump it out a year.
Yes. So, and it depends on if you're ready. So, if you're coming up on a surveillance year, you just would probably go through the surveillance to 2015 again. And then when you come up for the recert year, that's the typically preferred. But if you are ready when you're coming up on your surveillance year, you could just upgrade the certification at that point.
Is there more involved though, I'm assuming at that point in the surveillance audit?
It would be a longer audit just because it would be a full audit versus the surveillance audits are typically half.
With that being full, does that now mean your recertification's a year earlier?
So it would basically start, I believe it would start the cycle over again.
Okay. That's what I was curious about.
Yes. As far as I understand, so it's been a number of years now since there's been revisions to the standards.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, we're pushing 11 years on 9001.
Yes.
It's. I think COVID probably put a damper on it anyway, and then they probably realized, wow, we should probably reevaluate. We're changing a little bit, having seen this huge global issue.
Yes.
So what do you think the biggest mistake already certified organizations could make when preparing for that update to the 14001-2026 standard, assuming that nothing's changed or they don't want to overcomplicate their system?
So out of those two, probably assuming nothing has changed would be the biggest mistake. So the updates aren't very dramatic, but auditors will expect to see evidence that the organization has reviewed the new requirements and make adjustments where necessary.
Okay. So you're going to be on the hook for whether you think you should be or not.
Yes. Yep. And the other one you mentioned as far as overcomplicating the transition. So it's not so much about building a sustainability program from scratch with a new update, but it's about refining what already works for your business. But organizations that treat ISO 14001 as an evolution of an existing system, that tends to lead to the smoothest transition.
And not to sound like a promo, but this is one of the reasons we're here, to help you get through that transition. We have people like Norm and other people that deal with 14001 that can really help you navigate this and what makes the most sense. We're doing it daily. Not that you guys aren't familiar with your system, but with some of those changes, and as we know, even from anybody who gets into ISO, just learning how to translate that standard. Now, what do they mean? This looks really close to the last time that clause was written. I see some words change, but how do I get that pushed down into the real world?
Absolutely. Yep.
This has been great. Do you have any last thoughts on the whole update, and even anything you may feel about it, whether it's, from a positive, negative light, anything like that?
I mean, overall, I think it's going to be positive because I think there are some things that they decided to clarify a little further. So that's going to be a positive. But at the end of the day, it's not a major change to the standard, but it is, there are some clarification areas. So it's a good opportunity for businesses to basically revamp a little bit and, clarify a little further how things are, because there are new things that weren't as prevalent under the previous version, like we talked about data centers earlier. So that's going to be a consideration, as far as energy availability moving forward.
Right. I'm all for AI. I think it's got a lot of uses, but man, it's going to take a whole lot of energy to do this. And from a business standpoint, especially, I mean, and it's not just that everybody's using it for creativity, for, your self use, and then you have the business use, and then you have the ginormous corporations using it. It's something we really have to take into consideration.
Definitely.
Okay. Really want to thank you for being here. It's always great to see you. Hopefully you'll get another great trip sometime soon on a vacation, maybe out to a different part of the Mediterranean, or maybe, have you been out to Oahu or anything in Hawaii yet?
No, that's possibly on our list sometime, but
it's gorgeous. Yep. It is absolutely gorgeous. It's I lived out there for about 9 months on Oahu, and man, it's just a different world.
I can imagine.
It's gorgeous. Yeah. And you're still in America though. It's like, are you?
Yeah. And that's kind of one of the areas we like going to, which we've been to a couple of times, is Key West, because you still get that basically Caribbean vibe, but you can actually drive to it. So.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks again for being here.
My pleasure.
I want to give a big thank you to everyone who's tuned into today's episode. We hope you found it helpful and walked away with something valuable. Now, if you'd like to learn more about Core Business Solutions, now proudly part of the LRQA family, how we can support you with ISO certification, cybersecurity, customized training, any of these transitions into the newer updates of standards, we'd love to hear from you. Just email us at info@thecoresolution.com or visit us online at www.thecoresolution.com. If you haven't already, make sure to follow the Quality Hub podcast on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube so you don't miss our next episode dropping next week. Thanks again for listening. Have an awesome day.